I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we're Real Estate Elevated. Today's episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? Is talking about what happens if you back out of a deal here in North Carolina. Keep in mind before we get this started, if you are coming from another state or you haven't bought or sold real estate recently, things probably have changed or are very different than what you've previously experienced. So while I would love to say that every contract is easy peasy and just super smooth, sometimes things pop up during the contract period that might be non-negotiables for either party. So if you are the buyer in this scenario, let's talk through how you could potentially lose money and at what point in the contract those various things happen. So as soon as you go under contract, and we're talking about an executed contract with both the buyer and the seller having signed and are now under contract in an agreement that we have a certain number of days to close on the home. The first thing that's going to be due is due diligence. So due diligence is a non-refundable payment that is made to the seller that comes back as a credit to the buyer at closing. Due diligence is only present in a couple of different states, so North Carolina often throws people for a loop because we have this, as well as the fact that it is not held in escrow or in some kind of trust account necessarily. It's held with the seller in their personal account until closing. You immediately lose due diligence if you walk away from the contract at any time for a reason or no reason at all. The other thing that immediately comes on the line is earnest money. While earnest money is definitely not the same caliber or capacity as due diligence, numerically speaking, it's much smaller than due diligence. And in some contracts, we don't even have it at all. But there is a certain part of the contract period where earnest money comes into play. Once the due diligence window is closed, meaning that you've conducted your inspections and a few other things to investigate the property a little bit deeper to make sure you still want to proceed with the contract, by 5 o'clock on the due diligence date, your earnest money then comes into play. So keep in mind, if you're putting a bank of money in due diligence versus earnest, there's going to be a difference in the timeline of when those actually activate and are going to be on the line that you will lose if you walk away from the contract. The other thing is, as soon as you go under contract, typically within 24 hours, you're going to let your lender know that you're ready to order your appraisal. You always want to get that appraisal back before closing, for one, because you need to close on the loan, but two, you want to know, what does the home appraise for? Does it appraise for the same amount as the purchase price, more than, less than, and then still make a decision, do you want to continue with the contract? If there's a significant appraisal gap and, for example, you're not able to bring enough funds to closing, that could be a reason to void the contract, and you would walk away losing the cost it took you to order the appraisal, as well as anything else that's come into play at that point. The other one is a survey. So while a lot of survey companies will allow you to pay a portion up front, survey will be then conducted, and then the remaining balance can actually be paid at the closing table. But surveys typically run just under $1,000 depending on the size of the parcel, the property itself. So keep in mind, there could be a portion of those funds that you've already paid out of pocket, and even if you don't close, the survey company will still require that payment to be made at some point via a separate invoice. And then a big one that are out-of-pocket expenses that we expect to pay, but if we walk away from the contract, those are then funds we can't get back. And that's your inspections. Typically in North Carolina, you're going to do a general inspection on the home, which tends to be the lengthier of all the reports, that is chock full of lots of information, much of which you couldn't necessarily see in the time frame of a showing, or that may or may not have been known by the seller in order for them to disclose. If that happens, you have that general inspection, radon inspection, typically septic, well, and even sometimes a pest and specialist inspection, think HVAC, plumbing, things like that. All that information kind of culminates into your now view of the home. Sometimes that view can be significantly different. And in North Carolina, while it's an as-is purchase state, you do have the right to walk away from the contract for any or no reason at all, but it needs to be something that potentially is going to be harmful enough it's worth walking away from that money you've now spent. So typically at that point in the game, you now have your due diligence money on the line, some of that survey has been done, the appraisal, and now your inspections. So you want to add up that total to make sure that it's not greater than the risk of continuing with the property. The last one that may or may not come into play is any type of closing attorney or title fees. So you do a title search, a back history of the property to make sure it's got clear title. And if the closing attorney's done any work at that point, you could also be on the hook for paying some of those fees. So Keep in mind, North Carolina is an as-is purchase state. There is a lot of money that will come out of pocket, some of which is non-refundable, and you will not be able to get back if you walk away. So weigh that option heavily and make the best decision for you and the other folks who will either be living in the home or purchasing it with you. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate. Please like, share, and follow us in order to get more information on real estate here in the great state of North Carolina, specifically the Triangle MLS. Be sure to also subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Spotify and podcasts everywhere. We'll see you next time.